Hi, everyone. It's Vladimir Blagovic, and welcome back to the Full Funnel B2B Marketing Podcast. And today's guest is Frans Vanhaelewijck, who has actually been the product-oriented CEO since 2001. And he's currently running a company called Q1.6, which is a startup or a scale-up providing remote patient monitoring for the pharmaceutical and medical device companies. Frans, welcome.
Hello, Vladimir. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So let's just immediately dive in the first question. And I know that your company is focused, like I said, on pharmaceutical and medical device companies. So it's like a very specific niche. But I actually know you guys since you started. And I remember that you were serving other industries. I remember you were even doing some sort of like employee engagement and had other industries, other kinds of companies. Could you perhaps walk us through the journey through the evolution that you made in product positioning, how you came from like a broader positioning to such a focused niche positioning that you have now?
Sure. Well, it always really simple in retrospect, of course, but it was a hell of a decision in my first months when I was at the company. I knew two of the founders from working with them earlier in other companies. And it became clear real soon that they had developed a product and they succeeded to engage with people over a long time. And the name Q1.6, by the way, comes from a study done at Stanford where they investigated how long you and I are willing to answer short questions when you unlock our phone. And it turns out if you can read, understand, and answer a question in less than 1.6 seconds, you can engage with people for really a long time. And the good news is that really works. Now, we were applying that both in two different sectors, in human resources projects and in the medical sector. Two very different sectors and two very different use cases. HR departments were using it to establish a communication channel with their employees. For example, the CEO gives a company speech in the morning, and by early afternoon, you know how people had evaluated various aspects of the speech. Mm-hmm. In the medical sector, we are creating a dialogue with patients. For instance, patients who just had a surgery or volunteers participating in a clinical trial. And, you know, it's the classical difference between a vitamin versus a painkiller. For the HR department, we were really the vitamin. We made employee engagement a little bit better. But when there are cost cuts or there are other priorities, your project is the first one to go, and the budgets are really limited. Whereas for the medical sector, we really solve a problem they're having, because we are able to monitor patients using a smartphone, and that solves two conflicting objectives that people have. First of all, hospitals, certainly today with the pandemic and so on, they want to reduce the length of stay, and people want to go home as soon as possible. But at the same time, the doctors and the hospitals also want to give good care and want to monitor patients. And with remote patient monitoring, that's exactly what we do.
So is that something, as you mentioned, you realized that this was the bleeding neck problem, like this was a much bigger problem than the HR, and that basically the nice to have or the vitamin problem of the HR would be something that is this something that you noticed because people were like canceling projects, it was more difficult to sell, or how did you came to that conclusion and like you said, to make that such a big decision?
It's in fact a little bit of both. There were like many symptoms that you can see. First of all, budgets are much bigger in the medical sector. You can easily ask 3 or 4 times as much for those cases because you're really solving a problem. And for instance, the business case to be made for your product, if you can avoid one patient or one volunteer in a medical on the clinical trial running away from the trial in the middle of the project, if you can signal just one patient or you can avoid one patient to be lost during the clinical trial, that in fact already pays back for the investment that people have to make. Where in HR projects, yeah, you add a little bit of value, but that's a little bit better. Employee engagement, what does it really mean? The business case there was much more difficult to make. And of course, as a vendor, you need to understand the business case of your customer. How is the prospect sitting in front of you? How is he defending the project vis-a-vis his management? And if there's a clear business case to make, selling it is so much easier. Now there was, it's difficult to give up a sector because money was coming in. There were recurring contracts, but you saw that although it was basically the same product, yeah, it were like two product lines, two different sectors with very different requirements. So yeah, we made, if we can focus all our attention on one sector, we will grow so much faster. And that turned out to be difficult, but a correct decision, luckily, in the end.
Did you face any resistance from the team?
Yes. Yes, and that's of course something, that's the kind of decision you don't make in an afternoon or in one meeting. You put the question there, you look at various aspects, you hear arguments coming from people, you talk to customers, you put in a certain number of critical success factors that you need to reach in order to make the decision. And then yes, at the end you can everybody gets agreed and everybody indeed sees that's a good consensus to be made.
You mentioned just a moment ago, you said, luckily we made that decision, it turned out well. So can you maybe share some of the examples of how focusing on this one industry and reorienting your product towards that industry was beneficial for your growth and for your company?
Yes, the use case that we solve in the medical sector for pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies is that our thing that we bring, the real difference that we make is that we can build an intense, configurable, and highly accurate dialogue with patients. Mm-hmm. We have created a channel, and once you configure it well, and we've made a lot of experience of what works and what doesn't work in that 1.6 micro moments period that we have of communicating. We've been able to establish a dialogue with patients. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes make the example that we have, in fact, created the holy grail of data collection. Mm-hmm. Typical clinical trials, they ask you on paper, Vladimir, how did you feel the past 7 days? And you really have to think, how did I feel the past 7 days? And maybe today sun is shining and you feel a little bit better. And so your answer is a little bit tuned by the inspiration of the moment. And we say, look, Mr. Customer, you don't have to ask it once per week, how did you feel the past 7 days? Simply ask the same question every day. Vladimir, how do you feel today? That gives you 7 times more data points, which are more accurate and which are easier to answer. It's really the holy grail of data collection. And that's one of the key realizations that people who go really along with our idea and with our product understand that once we have that channel, wow, this gives lots of possibilities.
You mentioned, how did that translate to your business? You mentioned like basically the value of a contract is maybe 3 to 4 times higher. You mentioned, can you attribute the growth that you have also to that decision and that focus?
Yes, surely. One element, for instance, if you engage with patients in a clinical trial, every company who does that needs to submit their complete patient dialogue to ethical boards. Mm-hmm. You need approval before you can do that with patients. One of our early customers got a remark back from the ethical board. How comes you now only come with that idea? It means that when a patient is feeling bad or when a patient is indicating that it's not going well, a few hours later, it can be made visible in the dashboard of the hospital. Yes, indeed. And before, you had to wait till the patient came back into the medical center every week for his regular visit, and only then you could notice that he was not feeling so well. And for instance, in neuroscience trials for people with maybe depression and so on, that can really make a difference. So that was like a realization when our customer told us that look, we've had this remark, and I just mentioned it in passing, and I say, look, we're onto something. This can really make a difference compared to how traditional trials are run for the moment.
And you know, when I speak to some of the B2B executives, you know, and we are talking about positioning, and they have this idea of positioning basically being some sort of a fancy statement that you create in an offsite meeting, or which is something that is written by a copywriter, by a smart copywriter, but actually it's such a fundamental strategic decision for a company. And you know, I remember you mentioned it also during this conversation and during previous conversations. I remember you mentioned like it's so much more than just, you know, saying, okay, this is what we are doing right now. I mean, it impacts the product, it impacted all of this. So what were some of the things that you needed to do in order to become that, to become the remote patient monitoring app instead of being a more general app that allows companies and hospitals to communicate with patients or their employees?
That's an interesting question, and it's a topic that requires some thinking, of course. I'm convinced that as a small company, you can be successful. Your size is not really determining whether you can be successful at all. Even like we do in many of the big pharmas out there, which are like 10,000 times bigger than we are. So how can you still be successful? Well, it's that to really zoom in on some very specific issue, and that's what we did. And if you then look at other competitors who are also trying to get into the same market, but who maybe have a much broader and a wider scope, if you focus on one specific thing, they can never be so good in that one specific thing. We have really created the market for micro-moment interaction with patients and with subjects participating in clinical trials. And we see a lot of apps and a lot of people, of course, use mobile technology, and the idea of questionnaires online is not new at all. But once you have the best solution for that specific issue, you can really make a difference. And I think that's the message that you need to bring across when you're talking to prospects, when getting that data is really important. You can keep on iterating and keep on getting better and better technically in that specific issue that you're solving. For instance, we, from day one, we were believers that if we install our app on patient's own smartphone, personal smartphone, you get, of course, much better response rates because you have your smartphone with you all the time. If you leave home and you forget your smartphone, you go back to get it. So you have it there with you all the time. So we have that channel to those patients. And if we carefully select the moments during the day when we put the question, we have a very high chance that you will respond because it only takes you 1.6 seconds. But because we are working on personal smartphones and because our customers are doing trials all over the world, from Taiwan to Panama to, I don't know, everywhere, you can't believe, Vladimir, what kind of smartphones, what kind of low-cost devices you come across with all kinds of weird and modified Android versions. So you really have to be technical, very detailed of making sure your app does work on all those variations. People are without internet connections for several days in many of our trials. So our app needs to be consistent, needs to keep on working, needs to put the question at the right time on the right date, even without an internet connection. So caching, buffering, remote communication, and so on in the background. All these things can get really messy and complex, but you need to hide that from the user. You need to hide that from the person you're dealing with. But if you can solve that specific issue much better than all your competitors, you have a product, you have a niche.
I love it. So kind of trying to summarize, looking at the different aspects, because I think this is very useful advice that you shared. Is as a small company, if you want to succeed, you really need to focus. You cannot be everything to everyone. You can only be best at one thing, especially as a small company. And the other thing is be ready to really, that also allows you in a way also to really dive in and solve the specific issues, whether they are technical, whether they are, remember you were also saying about all sorts of certifications that you had to do because you're in this specific industry, and all the other things. But that actually allows you to make a much better product than somebody who is doing multiple things. I love this. And maybe just to shift gears a little bit, you're selling to this huge, like you mentioned, like 10,000, maybe even more than 10,000 times bigger than your own company. So how would you say, what would you say, what are the main ways that marketing and sales, when it comes to enterprise, are different than selling to SMBs?
The best and the easiest way to make deals, of course, is if you can building on references that you've made within that organization. That's surely the best way, and that even makes it in a strange way also a threshold for competitors. If you are dealing with prospects in the youth organizations that we work with, and we can tell them, look, over there and over there, and in that department, we already have projects running. They are so happy because they realize all of a sudden that a lot of work to get you into the organization already is done beforehand. So that means you've talked to procurement, you've done the necessary compliance checks, they've analyzed your company, they've looked at your results and established that yes, these people can be trusted. So that makes making a deal with you a lot more easier than maybe another company who has perhaps a much more shiny proposal and a thing which is cheaper than what you are offering, but they need to work for 2-3 months before they can even get them into the door. So that's really a huge difference that I had worked in as a software company in a pharmaceutical sector before, but that was even in the past few years with all the compliance checks and with all regulations, that became even more of a hindrance if you're new into the market. And we didn't realize it at first. We were not 100% conscious of the difficulties that we were facing. And it seems like a never-ending story, and there's always a new compliance checklist and a new quality management system audit and a new whatever to be taken care of. But if you consistently work on that, yeah, you establish yourself not only a niche in terms of product, but also a niche in terms of a partner for procurement. And it's then that effect, if you can have that in 1 or 2 customers, it's the kind of talk you can also start with new prospects. Literally, I had one not so small company. It was a medical device company in Switzerland who told us literally, look, if you're doing business with those guys and they find that you're okay, I'm sure that we will find that you're okay as well. Literally. So, of course, we had to do some checks and fill in some checklists and so on. But it was already like a big reference that we did business with other big pharma companies.
So for you, your advice would basically be focus everything in the beginning on landing that one big client, and that is going to completely change the game. It's going to be very hard to get there.
Yeah.
But once you get there, this is going to be your competitive advantage, and also a way to expand business with them and even win business in other companies.
Yes. And of course, at the same time, you have to take care that you don't build a product specifically for that customer. Yeah. And that's a challenge. That's the kind of job also I like to do. I've made my career in building self-funded software product companies. And how do you make a product? Well, you make a product based on some initial idea and some initial market validation, but you basically make the product based on customer feedback. And you have to really listen very well to customer feedback and see how that matches with your roadmap and how a specific question can be turned into a feature that is valuable, hopefully also in the years to come. And that's not easy, but that's really what the fun part is. And that's where I think software is such a wonderful industry to work in. You can build something, you can sell it to people, they give money for what you've built, but you still have it because you can sell it to another customer again, and they also give you money. And if you need new features, customers even want to pay you for those new features. And the next time you sell it to a customer, you can even ask more money. But I don't know of any other sector where I could work where this is possible. So this is the most wonderful sector in the world, in my opinion.
I think you really enjoy your job.
Indeed.
And, you know, selling technology, selling software, and these are, I assume, quite traditional companies, right, that you're selling to. I can imagine that there is quite some education that has to happen to make the people aware of the possibilities and why they should even be using a new technology like that. So if that is the case, if you find that to be the case, what did you find to be the most effective ways to educate new prospects about why they should consider and the value that they can get actually from using Q1.6?
Well, we have a very specific advantage that we use extensively, which is, of course, to let our product do the selling itself.
Okay.
Very early during initial contacts, we ask prospects if they have an example of a paper questionnaire. And we implement one page out of maybe 10 or 15 of those pages. And after the first initial meeting or second meeting, we sent everybody who was in the call, we sent them a demo activation code and invite them, look, download the app, enter this activation code. And okay, they do this. And all of a sudden they see their paper questionnaire coming to life. And they wake up in the morning, they pick up their phone, they want to, I don't know, want to look at Facebook or their mail, and they get a question from Q1.6. And at that point, Vladimir, that really, in a project, we see that really makes a difference, because it's then that people say, wow, this thing is powerful. It's there, and I answer it and it's gone. And often when we ask people, did you see the question? Oh, I don't remember did I get a question this morning or was it yesterday? So this micro moments thing, this is beautiful. If you can pinpoint, look, I'm looking at the dashboard, Mr. Customer, and I see that you've answered your question this morning. Oh, yes, you probably, yes, you're right. I forgot. So it's then that they realize that, my God, this is really powerful. If we can now have enough features to then really tune the dialogue that we want to build with our patients, yes, that is going to work.
I love it. It's actually maybe even not the first time, but you don't hear a lot often that you're actually selling to enterprise, to really big companies, and you're having different use cases that you're covering, and of course different departments and different companies will need kind of different solution, but you are actually using your product. It's kind of like product led, but then still enterprise, and I like that a lot. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, when you're selling to big accounts like that, do you have to kind of adopt a lot your story and your message to each individual account, or how does that work?
Yes, constantly. In fact, we are doing only a few deals, but it's there is a lot of value in each of the deal. And in those cases, I think you really need to be ready as a company to really tune your message. Of course, we have quite some material up our sleeve. We have demos, we have brochures, we have documents, we have little movies and so on. And we can pick and choose what is best in a specific circumstance. But really, we do a high level of customized approach for selling. And I think that really works if you can show them also what did work at other customers? What kind of experience did we get from the market? How are other people solving a very similar question than what you are explaining to me, Mr. Customer? Well, we learned that if you ask it like this, it works. But if you ask it like that, yeah, we get data points all over the place, and it was really difficult to get to a very consistent message. People are really attentive. People appreciate that you can kind of have those generic learnings without mentioning customer names or product names. You have to, or prospect names, you have to really be careful, and you cannot basically tell any customer that you're doing business with anybody. But if you can bring a real life experience, yeah, people believe you. One nice example that we have is that recently we are working a lot with sensor data, smartwatches. So instead of asking you how do you feel, at the same time we can also interrogate how was your sleep last night, how much hours of sleep did you get, and perhaps ask a question if it was very low or very high, and so adapt the questionnaire in terms of the readings that we do. Now everybody wants this, and everybody's really yes, I want all the sensors I can get. But then we say, look, Mr. Customer, take care. It's not so easy as it seems. And, you have different brands. People forget to load the battery. If you're using the Apple Watch, it's a very fine piece of equipment, but the battery runs out every 2 days. So you have to really take care when you design your questionnaire to be kind of independent and not be stuck if there is no reading. And then, yeah, people appreciate that you bring some real life experience, and that just by telling that in a sales conversation, yeah, it's not free consulting, but you're sharing experience, and it shows that even you're not trying to oversell it, because it would be easy to say yes, it can do everything, and we include all the sensors you can get. No, we dampen a little bit the experience, and we bring real life experience. We dampen a little bit the expectations by bringing real life experience, and that gets really appreciated by customers.
I'm sure you're basically acting as a trusted advisor instead of a sleazy salesman trying to push a solution down their throat. Mm-hmm. No, I love these stories, and just looking maybe at the time, and I was thinking about one question to kind of wrap it up. It's maybe a funny question, and I'm a big fan of fiction. I recently read this book about time travel, and the main character got a chance to redo their life again. And so maybe it's a funny question, but if you could do it all over again, what would you do different running these companies that you ran?
Well, sometimes I think about that, and I consider myself really lucky. I would take the same education. I would marry the same wife. I would again want to work as a software entrepreneur. So I consider myself really lucky, and I would be starting and managing self-funded software companies. And when talking to friends and other people, I'm not sure that everybody has such a consistent view as I do. However, there are things I would do different. And that is, in fact, to be more aggressive in decision making. And I mean by that, if it's obvious that things don't work, stop things sooner. Don't waste your time. Getting rid of people that clearly won't work in your organization. Even get rid of customers that are like harmful or that doesn't bring value. Time flies, and the older I'm getting, the more I realize that you never get back that. You never have a chance to recuperate lost time. So yeah, that's perhaps something I would do quite different if I would be able to restart.
What a wonderful way to wrap this up. So Frans, thank you so much. So maybe just mention, if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way? Check out your LinkedIn profile and get in touch with you there, or if they had any follow-up questions.
Yeah, sure. LinkedIn is there. Also, my email address is Frans, so FRANS @q16.ai.
That's a very short email, easy to remember.
Yeah. So if anybody has a question or would want to dive deeper, please contact me. Always happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Frans.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Vladimir.